Hello everyone, and welcome to the 148th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Imhotep from the Mummy franchise. First brought to the silver screen by Boris Karloff in 1932, the character of Imhotep the Risen Mummy has been a horror staple throughout the 20th century, one that has been reimagined with different names and motives time and time again. While the original film is fantastic, the 1999 remake as well as its sequel are some of my favorite films despite the amazing special effects, which, believe it or not, were actually pretty good for the time. I know my 8-year-old self was pretty astounded by them when this movie came out, and we all know kids are the ultimate judge of quality. Regardless, the movies in Imhotep are magnificent, and in this video, we're going to discuss everything that makes this mortifying mummy such a memorable presence in film decades after he made his first appearance. Now without further ado, let's begin. By happenstance, the real Imhotep, whose life we know very little about, was gradually raised up to the status of a demigod over the course of thousands of years following his demise. To get a better idea of who this man really was and how this happened, I'm going to read an article about him that you can find on the American Research in Egypt website now. Keep in mind that I'm not an Egyptologist, and my pronunciation might be a bit off at places. The name of Imhotep is associated in Egyptological literature with the first pyramid, the famed step tomb of King Necherket, later known as Djoser the Holy One. Knowledge of both historical figures is shrouded in legend because only a few sources from their time have been found. In the case of Imhotep, contemporary references are limited to 2 inscriptions mentioning his name and titles in connection with Djoser and his successor Sekhemkhet, both of the 3rd dynasty in the Old Kingdom, approximately 2686 to 2613 BCE. These temples call Imhotep the royal seal bearer and great of seers, that is, the priest of the Temple of Heliopolis, as well as overseer of sculptors. There is no explicit mention of his role as architect of Djoser's pyramid complex. Nevertheless, the presence of his name and titles on the base of a statue of this king is evidence of his elevated position in the royal court. The original location of this statue in the funerary complex of the king, plus the titles related to building and sculpture, point to a historic role as designer of Egypt's first monumental structure in stone. Despite the scarcity of actual information about his life, Imhotep's achievements left such an impression that his memory not only survived, but became a legend in the millennia following his death. By the New Kingdom, he was listed as among the wise men of the past, also noted as the most ancient of them. In other sources, Imhotep is mentioned with sages such as Hordadef, Kakeperaseneb, and Ptahhotep. Compositions attributed to all these authors have survived, supporting the inference that similar texts written by Imhotep may have circulated in the Middle and New Kingdoms. In fact, Manetho reports in his Egyptica that Imhotep busied himself with writing. By the New Kingdom, he was venerated as patron of scribes, but Imhotep's image was elevated even more in the late period when he started to be worshipped in the Memphis region and was considered to be son of the god Ptah. Imhotep's cult image appears at this point, a seated figure wearing a cap and holding an unrolled papyrus in his lap. Several hundred bronze figurines depicting Imhotep in this guise have been found from this period. By the late and Greco-Roman periods, several narrative traditions were composed around Imhotep and Djoser. One papyrus from the Teptunis Temple library dating to the Roman period narrates different episodes of a fictionalized life of Imhotep. This text and other sources describe his divine father Ptah, his mother Karadunak, and his sister Renpet-Neferet, sometimes also referred to as his wife. Imhotep is depicted as a powerful magician in Djoser's royal court. In one episode, he travels to Assyria to recover the 42 limbs of Osiris and fights in a magical contest against an Assyrian sorceress. Another fragmentary episode refers to the House of Rest of Pharaoh, which might be a reference to Djoser's step pyramid and to Imhotep's involvement in its construction. Another text, the so-called Famine Stela, is set in the time of Djoser and Imhotep, although it was actually composed in the Ptolemaic period. The stela presents the monarch as a wise ruler worried about his starving country because of faulty Nile inundations over 7 years. To solve the problem, Djoser consults Imhotep, who is described as a lector priest, son of the god Ptah, and a member of the staff of the Ibis, connecting him with the cult of Thoth. Manetho may have consulted these narratives for his Egyptica. In the sections of the Egyptica concerning the reign of Djoser, Imhotep is described as devoted to medicine, as writing books, and as the inventor of building with stone. Now, with all of these legendary attributions, it's no wonder that the name of Imhotep managed to survive into the age of film as a mystical character. Imhotep is brought to life via Boris Karloff's signature dour and insidious attitude that marks him as a quiet and sinister menace throughout the film, and this shot of him that's used throughout the film exemplifies that. In this version of the story, Imhotep was sentenced to be buried alive by his father after he attempted to use the Scroll of Thoth to revive Ankh and Amun, which is what they call her in this film. And after being uncovered in an archaeological dig alongside a casket that contains the scroll, Imhotep is revived, and he sets himself on a course to reunite with the reincarnation of his beloved. This version of Imhotep appears to us as more of a scholarly gentleman, one who's attempting to blend into modern society, so he might achieve his goals covertly while acting in plain sight. And in that capacity, he even speaks English, unlike his remade counterpart. While Boris did a fantastic job, it would be through Arnold Vosloo that this character truly came to life. The Imhotep that most of you are familiar with is similar in his goals, but his backstory and his overall character are much different. Imhotep was the high priest of the pharaoh Seti I, who ruled some 1300 years after the real Imhotep lived. Imhotep fell in love with the pharaoh's wife, Anck-su-namun, which of course couldn't have been more forbidden, and when Seti found Anck-su-namun with her body paint smudged, a woman who was not to be touched by anyone but Seti himself, Imhotep and his lover murdered her husband. With their actions about to be discovered by the Magi, the pharaoh's bodyguards, Anck-su-namun chose to take her own life before a punishment worse than death could be placed upon her, with the hopes that Imhotep would revive her using the Book of the Dead sometime later. Before Imhotep could complete the ritual that would bring her back to life, however, he was discovered by the Magi. Imhotep was not as lucky as his lover, and he, along with his priests, were forced to endure a horrid punishment known as the Humdai, which consisted of live mummification, a bath of scarab beetles, live burial, and a spell that would cause the afflicted to become undead. Undead can mean many things depending on what the term is used for, but here, undeath means a state of in-between, a sort of corporeal purgatory if you will. Imhotep was denied both the bliss of reaching the afterlife and mortality, instead achieving a sort of immortality that forced him to sit conscious in his sarcophagus until the end of days, that is, unless he was released. It's said that the Egyptians feared this punishment, not because of how horrific it was, but because of the horrific consequences that could possibly arise from its use. For you see, such an unholy punishment is a double-edged sword. It's the worst pain and torment that one could possibly inflict upon their greatest enemy, but it's also the most wicked curse that one could potentially inflict on themselves. For if the afflicted manages to gain freedom from their bindings, they become a living plague upon the earth that brings with them the 10 plagues of ancient Egypt. Along with these dark powers, this living wraith would hold within their being great strength, tenacity, and mystical prowess that would make them a beast untamable by any force mortal man could muster. And so it is that Imhotep, the great demon bound by the powers of old for his crimes against the royal family, rose once again with the might granted to him by the barbarity of his punishment. As you can imagine, a person who endured such torture would be rather cross about having to suffer so brutally and for so long, and Imhotep quickly sets about invoking a wrath that's been burning inside him for millennia. Imhotep is terrifying and ruthless, and the power that he holds at his fingertips ensures that if he's allowed to walk unhindered through our mortal realm as an unkillable demon god, that he would destroy the entire world as we know it. And the cruelty present in his quest for both the resurrection of his lover as well as world domination is terrifying to say the least. Now, the amount of nuance within the character of Imhotep is honestly minuscule, as his motives and actions in both films can be basically boiled down to 3 things. He's angry, he's in a weakened state and needs to regenerate his powers, and he wants to revive the love of his life so he might live out the rest of eternity in dreadful bliss. So with that in mind, what I'd rather discuss with you now are 2 things that are central to the events of both films: love and power. The entire reason for Imhotep's existence as this necrotic force of vengeful evil is his love for a woman that he was not allowed to love. Love is the great unifier, the bond that ties one person to another with affection, passion, care, and companionship. And love is perhaps the most powerful metaphysical force that exists in the universe, as it's through love that we are born and raised, and the structures of our society were created to foster that love, keep it safe, and provide for the ones that we hold dear. Now, of course, a person can be born and raised via all sorts of cruelty, and the structures of our society don't often favor all that they intend to care for. But as horrid circumstances of a person's beginnings are the exception rather than the rule, it's love that we can look to as the foundations of our world. Love is a thing of beauty, and as long as it's appropriate, to deny anyone their right to love another is one of the more widely accepted cruelties present within our society. I could be wrong, but I imagine that as the wife of the pharaoh, Anck-su-namun wasn't exactly seen as a partner, but rather as his property, and therefore her decision to stay married to him was not hers to make. Also, as much as it's not an ideal thing for your spouse to fall in love with another person, it would seem that Imhotep and Anck-su-namun were in love with one another prior to her marriage, and because a king always gets what he wants, that didn't matter in the eyes of anyone in the pharaoh's court, least of all the pharaoh himself. So, at the time that Anck-su-namun and the pharaoh were married, Imhotep's only crime was continuing to love a woman that had been forced to marry someone she didn't want to marry. And like we've seen countless times throughout different mediums and our own history, they chose to keep their love intact despite the circumstances of their situation. There was no guarantee, of course, but such a relationship is bound to run into some sort of trouble eventually, and it just so happens that the trouble these two ended up finding was that of revelation of their affair, which unfortunately leads to a murder and their respective deaths. Now, obviously it isn't right to murder someone because they're married to the woman you love, and there's no excuse for Imhotep's and Anck-su-namun's actions here. However, we can sympathize with their plight, and we can also decry the circumstances that led to the murder of another person in this sordid affair. Again, love is one of the most potent forces known to man, and no one, as long as it's appropriate, should feel that their love is forbidden, no matter the obstacles placed in their way. And the fact that two people were forced to hide their love for one another because of a king's supposed right to everything he sets his eyes on is cruel and wrong. So yes, Imhotep deserved to be punished for his crimes, but the circumstances that led to him committing those crimes were unfair and unjust, and all involved parties deserve to be condemned here. Some more than others, of course, but condemned nonetheless. The fact that his punishment for committing a murder, or more appropriately a crime of passion, was the pain of intense torture and eternal unrest in a sarcophagus buried in the sand is something to consider as well. And when you do consider all the facts of the situation, this punishment went far beyond being cruel and unusual. But if anything is a testament to how powerful of a force love is, it's the fact that after thousands of years of torment, Imhotep still had only one thing at the forefront of his mind: the reignition of the love he had given his life for via the resurrection of Anck-su-namun. And as horrid as everything that transpired because of that love is, it cannot be understated how endearing such a powerful bond is, a bond that transcends time itself. Though we often equate love with good, love is not reserved only for the righteous, and it is in the name of love that great evil can be manifested by those who wish to preserve or acquire it. Who knows what Imhotep and his would-be bride had planned for their lives had their affair not been discovered. But with it being revealed, and the events of this story in motion, whatever ambitions they had for their lives were transformed into the abuse of the great power afforded them by their punishment to take control of the world and rule over it as king and queen until the sun darkened and the oceans dried. It is because of an unjust punishment that a curse is cast upon a man, a curse that gives him overwhelming power, and because of the error of that punishment, the power festering within his desiccated corpse is a force that some are more than willing to entertain in order to advance their own position in the world. It's entirely possible that Imhotep's resting place would have never been discovered, and the power of his curse might have remained nothing more than a possibility that never came to be. However, the concealment of treasures like the Book of the Dead and the Book of Life at Hamunaptra and the legend surrounding the treasure buried there all but assured that wouldn't be the case, as people will always be drawn to the promise of treasure and untold riches, or power unimaginable that has been lost to the sands of time. Thus, the power of Imhotep manifesting upon the earth as the deadliest plague mankind had ever or would ever experience was almost a guarantee, and this man who had once only wished to love the woman he loved was transformed into a power-hungry monster who embodied the evil that was inflicted upon him. However, that would end up being the folly of his curse, as his quest to sustain and expand his power by conquering the Scorpion King against the wishes of his love sealed Imhotep's fate, and in his last moments, he was forced to face the fact that he had already obtained everything he truly wanted. His lover revived, and their union renewed. Yet now, in this state of overwhelming might granted to him by his curse, he could not see past its allure. Clarity of the peace he had reobtained, denied to him by cruel magic. And in his last moments, Imhotep, the man who loved a woman so much that he would give everything to be with her, lost her due to his own arrogance, a realization that he mournfully takes with him to his final resting place, as he's abandoned by the woman who he thought held love for him that was greater than all the grains of sand in the desert. A man who enters the depths of the underworld, thoroughly corrupted by evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Imhotep? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, to my patrons, and to anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank. And a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.